So we're going to look at a handful of Haggadot. This is in no way going to be exhaustive, so there will be a part two probably next year. I got to save something for the future. But I wanted to look at a handful of Haggadot. Maxwell House may wait till next year. Right? And what you're looking at is actually the cover page or the cover of Haggadah printed in Venice in 1609. And there are a couple of notable items that I just wanted to highlight. A, the fact that this is not the earliest printed Haggadah. We'll see one of those in a little bit, but it's got this wonderful incorrect depiction of Moses, which we talked about a little bit last time, right? Moses has horns, right? But they're not animal kind of horns. They're more rays of light. So it's as if someone fused the original text, which talked about how Moses's face was glowing, with the incorrect translation that was created by the Vulgate that Moses had horns. And so you routinely see depictions of Moses with these ray-like horns emanating outward.
You know, if you didn't say that, I wouldn't have noticed.
Yeah, wouldn't it?
Is that this
Well, I
rabbi?
That's that up top, yes.
I did.
They're,
That-
they're not rabbit ears. No one's punking him from behind going like this.
I
Um,
was hoping it was just part of the decoration.
When I was a teenager
Unread.
and a candy striper in the hospital where my mother worked, I had someone ask me about Jews and horns.
Yeah,
Bonnie Cassenberg.
We talked about it last week.
yeah, we keep our horns in our cars like everybody else. Okay, so many of the Haggadot tell parts of the story of Pesach. And I just grabbed this one because it's not so much Midrash as it is a depiction of this narrative of Moses and Aaron in front of Pharaoh, and how the staff that Aaron throws down swallows the staves or the snakes that are formed from the staves of the Egyptian magicians. Now, before anybody says it, yes, I recognize the fact that that looks nothing like a real snake. It looks more like a lizard, especially if you look at what look like, I'm going to call them paws for lack of a or feet for lack of a better term. But it's just it's interesting how this artist chose and then at the same time managed to not draw a snake, which I'm thinking, heck, I can draw a snake.
It looks like it has two heads.
Well, it's actually got multiple heads at
Yeah.
the front, in that it is, this is the head of the one that's being held, and it is swallowing the staves, the snakes of the other, of the Egyptian magicians. So that's why it looks like it has multiple heads, so you can appreciate that they're being swallowed.
interesting, the fingers are all pointing.
Yes, they are all pointing. It is actually something that happens a lot in the Sarajevo Haggadah. Not always clear to me why. In some of them, we'll see, some of the things we're going to see, pointing makes a difference. Here, I'm not clear on who's pointing at whom and why.
They're all,
Unless, this is meant to sort of point fingers of blame and shame. Okay. One of the common motifs in many of the early Haggadot is to depict both preparations for Pesach and the celebrations of Pesach. So what you have at the top, if you'll notice, there are men with books who are either leading a Seder or teaching the women around them. Okay. This one, I think this one is meant to be more the learning process. And down here, you'll see the Seder table and the celebration of Pesach.
Is that done by a Christian? The reason why I ask is because the way the table is set, it looks like the Lord's Last Supper.
It's an interesting question. I don't know enough about the Darmstadt specifically to be able to say, other than it was not uncommon for Christian artists to be engaged to do this kind of work, in part because Jews didn't do this kind of stuff. And that whole second commandment thing kind of put a big kibosh on the Jewish visual arts. And there really was not a mechanism for them to train, because these were closed guilds. Though we do see, so we do see examples of Haggadot that are illustrated by Jewish artists, because we know that because of the fact that they've signed them at the back.
And wasn't Jesus's last meal a Seder supposedly?
Yes, probably not supposedly. That's he was a good Jewish boy. He went to Pesach, you know, and he brought his friends home with him, and they stayed up too late and they drank too much wine. Okay, and that's just a close-up of the scene at the bottom.
Same things.
Yeah, no, it's the same figures. It's just a better close-up of the bottom of that page.
An answer to Hardy's question. It was produced about 1430 in Ulm by the scribe Israel ben Meir.
That just tells you who wrote it. That doesn't tell you who illustrated it. All right, and
Is that a fish on the table?
no,
Bunny rabbit.
that yeah, my guess is it's supposed to be a sheep or a lamb, actually.
It's got legs.
Yeah, you can see
Yeah.
the legs in the front, legs in the back. Well, sometimes the artistic quality of some of these is a little
Primitive.
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 It's also a woodcut.
Yes, but it's still we're gonna see woodcuts that are more
Yeah.
refined. Right? This is the Erna Michael. Oh, by the way, the names of the Haggadot refer to the collection in which they are found. It does not generally refer to the artist or the provenance of the Haggadah. Sometimes it does, but most of the time it tells you what collection it came from, right? But you see the same sort of motif where you have what looks like the castle structure, and within it, activity, right? No, that one came up fuzzier than I thought. Okay. All right. This is Venice 1609 title page. And you can see here in the Hebrew, Venetia, Venice, and the Hebrew year, which is why it allows us to date it so specifically. And you can just see the surrounding activity, right, which is fascinating in and of itself. But this is matzah production. All right. Here, you'll notice that there's a woman at a thing that has two openings, right? You put the flour in one, then you put the water in the other, and then only when you're ready do you bring them together, and you keep them away from any possible chametz. Right? And down here you can see how the women are rolling out the matzah, and it's going into the oven.
Can we try maybe dimming some lights? I have a big
sure.
glare on my,
We can do that.
Okay, got it commented everybody. That better for you?
It's coming from the window.
Okay.
Well, pretty.
It is
good.
bad.
Have shades in.
I don't think we need to light it.
Okay, I can't do much about that.
No, it's
Um,
better.
That is better.
Okay, I mean, we could try to squeeze in the class during the 4 minutes of an eclipse. Okay. Okay, and then the verses talk about the making, the command to prepare matzot. Okay. Part of many, the motif at the beginning of many of these Haggadot is about getting ready for Pesach. We saw the matzah preparation. We'll see that again. If you look down here, you can see it says, or, okay, la'arba asar. On the evening of the 14th, we looked for chumetz, and that's what this gentleman over here is doing in his, see, in Haggadot, it is really true that a man's house is his castle, because this is what they look like. All right, but down here, you have the barrel, so it's wine production. All right, and then it says achar bdika. All right, there was a concern that after you search, you worry about whether critters bring more chumetz in, and it talks about how you don't have to worry about that. Okay, Prague 1560. All right, there's our gentleman with his candle and his bowl and his feather and the same text and the same blessing for the checking of chumetz, which technically is not part of the Seder. We know this, but it is almost universal for Haggadot to include that, because you need the blessing and you need the formula. And where better to put it than in the book specifically created for Pesach. Okay. Oops, sorry. This is from the first Cincinnati Haggadah, dates to the 1740s, 1470s. We're going to have it again, so we'll get the right date. But again, you see, I want to say it's the 1470s. You see the gentleman at the cabinet, and he's holding his bowl, and he's cleaning his cabinets.
So the men did that.
In most, they didn't clean, they just checked.
Uh,
Don't get crazy.
That's the way it is.
All right,
Nice try.
all right. This is from the Bird's Head Haggadah. I recognize it's a little fuzzy, but I just wanted to show you that this is one of the earliest illustrated Haggadot. It's from the early 1300s, right? And you see the production of matzah in various stages. They're kneading it, they're rolling it, they're transporting it, and they're baking it. This is from Haggadah from Pune in India. And again, it's the same idea, but you see each Haggadah captures part of the realia of what did people wear? What did they look like? What did they dress like? So I just wanted to appreciate that where you are, you want your Haggadah to look like you.
Is that round matzah?
Yeah.
Shmuel.
Shmura matzah, before they started manufacturing it by machine, matzah was round. Because when you rolled it out, it's like rolling out, well, I'd say pizza dough, except I've never made a round pizza. They're always unusually shaped pizzas. My son, who worked at a pizzeria for a while, and now Miriam, who's doing pizza at where she works, make round pizzas. But theoretically, when you roll it out, it's supposed to, if you roll it out properly, it's supposed to be round
I was
or relatively round.
I was at 7 Mile Market in Baltimore last Sunday, and there were boxes and boxes and boxes of Shmura matzah, different brands,
Oh, yeah.
which, I hadn't seen before like that.
Oh,
And
Oh.
different prices too.
yes.
Yeah, But I didn't look at the prices because I
The
wasn't
prices can
buying it.
Go up to like
Anyway.
$50 for.
Yeah.
two
Yes.
sheets.
Yeah, the prices can get a little crazy.
Like,
We use shmura matzah, or let me rephrase that. I use shmura matzah, and we use it at our Seder, and then I eat it the rest of the week.
And that's the bread of poverty and affliction.
It's
$50
bread for matzah. It's highly specialized and limited time consumption.
That's the
Um,
brand name?
Shmura matzah means matzah that has been watched more diligently than regular matzah, in that matzah production is supposed to be done very quickly, right? And you're supposed to make sure that there's no leavening that takes place so that the bags of grain are stored and watched to make sure that there's no moisture that drops in anywhere. And then as they're transported, they're checked again. And then at every step, they're watched a little more diligently than machine-made matzah. Though on one level, the machine-made matzah is less.
Kosher?
No, not at all.
Less handled.
It's less handled and is less prone to have mistakes because it's all automated. So if the production line is set at a certain speed, you know that it's going to get from place A to place B from place B to place C, all in a pre-timed manner. So you're not worried, oh, I'm having trouble rolling out this dough because it's humid and it's sticking, and I've delayed the rolling out process, which delays it getting it into the oven to be baked. Because you got to do from the time you mix the flour and water, from the second you mix the flour and water, you're supposed to be done at the other end with the baking within 18 minutes. Right?
18.
18. Very quick.
Right.
That's right. That's what I was thinking. 18.
Yeah, I'm not sure that was the basis for it. But it's a convenient coincidence.
It's easy to remember that way.
The way I learned it was that the rabbis considered that after 18 minutes, wild yeasts could start the mixture rising. That's the way.
Yeah.
Well, I'm only saying that's the way. I
I, like you, and probably all of us, have learned a few Bubba Meinses along the way. Okay. So this is from the Washington Haggadah, done in 1478, and you have preparing for Pesach. All right. I find this one intriguing for several reasons. Okay. One,
The dog.
there's a dog. All right. I don't really think of, Jews living in the 15th century as having dogs as pets. It's just not a thing, and it was not a commonplace thing amongst Jews.
I don't see a connection to Pesach.
Oh, well, this is they're roasting
Lamb.
their dinner, which is the second fascinating thing, because while the original Pesach and the Pesach celebration during the temple period, when you had people bringing their Pesach offering, was a lamb, which you roasted, by and large, the rabbis discouraged roasting lamb for Pesach once the temple was destroyed, because it was a temple thing. And they didn't like you to emulate things that were done exclusively in the temple outside of the temple. So it's not clear to me whether this artist was sort of depicting something of a arcane past, or whether this was a reality, because I have heard over the years of some communities that do in fact eat roast lamb on Pesach.
Our friend Wendy Kramer, who's originally from London
Mhm.
and now lives in Ottawa. Her family tradition
Was
is
eating lamb. Okay.
Seder.
So for me, this was like, I was like, did they really do that in this community that's being depicted in this Haggadah? Right? I also find it kind of amusing that, the person who's
It's left-handed.
is turning the spit with his left hand and drinking with his right. And not to be left out, the cook has a cup as well.
Snaps going on there.
Oh,
Yeah,
actually,
right.
before we go away from that, there is also something in the Gemara that talks about how you are supposed to drink wine during the day before the Seder in order to build your appetite.
Huh.
Well, I don't know how well that works, but maybe
Yeah.
maybe that's what they're up to. Okay. One motif, which becomes sort of a common motif through many, if not all, I won't say all, most Haggadot into modernity, is they will print the steps of the Seder, Kadesh, Orchatz, Karpas, Yachatz, and they will depict each of the activities if it's not just a word list.
That's neat.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work involved in that.
Yes. And this, this is, it's small. It's small. It's small. So you're working much.
Now, the whole Haggadah is not like that,
No,
just,
there are certain pages that are illustrated. Some Haggadot more elaborately so, some less so. Okay, so we talked about this as a Midrash last week, all right, about how because the biblical text uses 6 verbs and adverbs to describe the proliferation of the Jews, you have in the Dragon Haggadah, which is one of the oldest illustrated Haggadot, you have that Midrash being depicted by, the Midrash says that each woman, when she gave birth, had 6 kids. All right, so here is a woman giving birth. The verse that describes the proliferation of the Jews is at the top above where I cut off the picture. And Kaneno Hora Mazel Tov, she's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 children. In a very do-it-yourself kind of thing, because there's not a midwife anywhere to be seen.
Fully dressed.
Yeah, she's fully dressed.
Well, this is a PG volume, so one has to make certain concessions.
She's got work to do when she's finished.
Okay?
Yes.
But it's not just to show you that this, once an idea is sort of introduced, it kind of persists. Here you have Venice 1609, and here's one woman with her 6 children, and here's another woman, and here's another woman, and at least here, the women who are giving birth are getting some measure of
Yeah, it looks like
assistance.
one family. 4 daughters of all their kids.
Same idea. All right. Another motif that appears routinely, or is introduced and then appears routinely, is illustrations of the 10 plagues. All right. And, by the way, just for it's not Hebrew on the sides. It's
not.
it's Hebrew characters, but it's Italian written in Hebrew characters.
So, okay.
Okay, so this is a very, very late one. It's the latest one, or the most contemporary one that I think I'm going to show you today. All right, and it's the scene of Pharaoh's daughter finding Moses in the basket floating in the Nile. Right? What's unusual about this picture?
Because it's got Moses in it, and God is supposed to not have Moses in discussion.
Now, remember, we already saw Moses on the cover of a Haggadah, so
With
the-
horns.
He's a big
that
boy.
idea, while true for the original text, becomes less true in depictions and in later Haggadot.
He does not look like a newborn,
Well, he is 3 months old.
still.
Okay.
You see Miriam hiding.
We did get used to seeing Miriam hiding in the background last week. No Miriam hiding in the background. Okay, look kind of carefully at Pharaoh's daughter. Anything strike you about her?
It looks Egyptian.
She does look Egyptian, which on one level, one of the things we do see as we get into more contemporary Haggadot is that the depiction of Egypt becomes more accurate, or relatively so, because once you get into the 1800s, the Haggadot that are made then and after benefit from all of the archaeological explorations and things that are done. So artists are now making Egyptians not only look more Egyptian, but more old style Egyptian. Yes, Martha.
This time, coming at it from an art historical standpoint. But this period in art history in Paris, artists are influenced by Egypt, Egyptian, Oriental, African, all of this. So I think there's an element of that in there. So except for the date tree in the middle, the trees are very un-Middle Eastern.
They are, that is certainly true. Okay, so now I'm gonna unravel this for you. Ready? Look at her elbow. She's got very, very long arms.
And very long legs.
Yeah, yeah. In the Hebrew of the biblical text, it says that Pharaoh's daughter, Vatishlach et yada, she sent forth her arm so as to be able to reach the child. Right? And the Midrash builds on that and says, yes, her arms grew unusually long so as to be able to reach the child while she was still standing on the shore. In other interpretations, they say, oh, that just means she sent one of her handmaidens to find, which is kind of what we saw in some of the artistic renderings that we looked at last week, where there was someone who was bringing the child to the Pharaoh's daughter. Sometimes it was Miriam, sometimes it was Yocheved, sometimes it was a random person, all right? But this artist, I think, is, at least to my mind's eye, capturing that midrash, that magic. Her arm got
very much in proportion.
I didn't think so.
You don't think she's in proportion?
But what do I know?
I mean, her
Like I said,
leg-
and I don't know if
she
I'm,
looks very tall with long legs and long arms.
maybe, I like I said, maybe I'm reading it through the prism of the midrash, but for me, this always struck me as like, ooh, those are very long limbs.
I wonder sometimes whether the artists were really cognizant, especially in this modern period, of midrashim like that, and are
It's-
just following artistic
It's
convention of the time. period.
it's very quirky, because it's very quirky what they pick up on and what they don't. Okay, so let's go back in time. We're back to Venice in 1609, and who is in the tub? The king. Okay, so that would be Pharaoh, and he's suffering from the plague of boils, right? And how do you treat the plague of boils? With the blood of children.
With what?
The blood of children. Very nasty. That's what's being depicted over here.
Is that where the blood libel comes
That
from?
of the
No,
blood.
it's older than that. Okay, so one of the earliest Haggadot is the bird's head Haggadah, and I forgot to grab it this morning, but someone actually made a pop-up version of the bird's head Haggadah, which is absolutely hysterical. But it represents the fact that Jews didn't depict human beings. All right, so this entire Haggadah, every time you see a person, the person has the head of a bird, and they're usually wearing one of these hats that indicates southern Germany.
Why? Why did you depict people in the God? You're not depicting God, you're talking about people.
We are created in the image of God. We did not for centuries do human form art.
For that reason?
For that reason.
Thank you.
That whole that second commandment thing.
Thanks.
You don't depict God, you don't depict anything that represents God. Okay, close up. And little hats. Okay. One of the other motifs, leaving Egypt. All right, now, this is leaving Egypt. This is probably meant to be Pharaoh chasing after them, hence the crown and the chariot. Okay, over here, you're leaving. All right, you've got your hobo stick on your shoulder, and you apparently you could pick up matzah on as you were going out. Yeah, pop up.
Get your matzah right here.
Get your matzah for the road. Right? And the Hebrew here says habatzek. So this is supposed to be a depiction of the dough that they brought with them, which the mythos makes no sense, right? They take this dough with them because they didn't have enough time to let it rise before they baked it, right? Have you ever been, how many people have baked bread? Okay, so what happens if you leave the dough or take it with you as you're running errands? What's going to happen to it?
Rises.
Rises or overrises.
It rises or overrises. It does not stay. Right? So
Overrises, what happens is it collapses.
it collapses, but it doesn't make matzah.
No.
It makes bleh, but it doesn't make matzah. So I always found that, wait, it's one of those, until you actually do a thing, you sort of accept it as, oh, okay. And then it's like, the first time I baked bread, I'm going like, wait.
What about the 18 minutes?
Well, that's later. Right? But the whole idea is they took the dough with them because they were being forced out so quickly that they didn't have time to bake the bread. But if they'd taken it along, it would have risen.
But then it would get flat.
And then it would flatten out. But it was just one of those where it just didn't, once you do it and you're like, this
Doesn't compute.
this does not compute. Okay. Why did I include this first Cincinnati one? Okay. So a lot of the illustrations are illustrations of the Maggid section, the section where we talk about the Israelite experience in Egypt. And this is, we built the cities of Pitom and Ramses. Okay. Okay, those are the two Egyptian cities that the Israelites were part of the building of. And I guarantee you, Pitom and Ramses never looked like that. All right, but the artist is going like, okay, what does construction look like? Oh, there's a site down the street. I shall go and see how they are doing it.
Is he chopping down a tree?
He's actually planing it to flatten it out. Okay, as I mentioned, many of the Haggadot illustrate aspects of the story of Pesach in the Magid section. So that's Moses appearing before Pharaoh. This is the plague of frogs at the bottom. Well, you got to think a little bigger. Vayotzienu Adonai mimitzrayim biyad chazaka uvizroa netiyah. And God brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm.
Flying dragon.
Well, of course, right? But yes, that hand you see at the top is a very, very not Jewish depiction of the Holy One with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm holding a sword.
The angel holds the outstretched arm.
The angel is pointing probably to highlight the text or to highlight that it's God that's doing it. Especially if you think about it, that the text continues. Lo al yedei malach, velo al yedei saraf. This was not done by an angel or by a seraph or by an emissary or anything else, but rather by the Holy One. Okay. There are many, many critters that are depicted on the pages of medieval illustrated Haggadot. They come in the category of grotesques, which are non-real creatures, often hybrids of creatures, sort of like a griffin or a centaur, things that are fusions of various creatures, sometimes human and non-human creatures. You also have creatures that were common in art and motifs in the Middle Ages. And because these were done often by non-Jewish artists, they put in what they knew from illustrating documents or Labriut, a Christian text. Now, this maror zeh she'anu ochlim. This is the maror that we eat, and the guy's holding up the maror, right? And where's he pointing?
Kind of pointing at each other.
They are pointing at each other, right? That is a little playful motif that appears various times in Haggadot, right? Maror zeh, this bitter thing over there, right? I started with this one because they're pointing at each other, but more often, and they're in case it wasn't clear. I thought I had the next. Hold on a second. I got to find something. Where'd it go? I thought I had all the maror ones together. Oh, sorry. All right. This is the bird's head. He's chomping down on his maror. All right. The brother Haggadah. Okay. But again, you see that's the depiction of maror. Notice it is a leafy thing, not a rooty thing. All right. Note all of them have been leafy things. All right. But here too, where's the guy pointing? He's pointing at his wife. Maror zeh. Right. Yeah, what she's holding is not consequential. What you don't see in the next picture is that he's wearing the wine. Okay, so let me go back now. So this motif of maror zeh with this little embedded kind of playful pointing is not uncommon, but it's also not new, right? This is 1450.
What percentage of families would have
money to purchase these Haggadah?
You didn't so much purchase it as commission it. All right, and it was very limited. It was very limited. This would have been something that only families with significant wealth would have been able to acquire. In some of them, part of the front page will incorporate the family shield or the family crest, which also tells you that this was a family that could afford a family shield or a family crest. You know, I can tell you that my family has a family shield. I cobbled one together using different pictures on my computer. And at one point, I printed them and we had them on T-shirts so that we could easily be identified by people when we were traveling with the kids. This does not necessarily reflect any claim to great status at all.
Who would be likely to commission the Haggadah back then?
The Rothschilds.
No, the 1400s.
An affluent Jewish family. Look, there were Jews who had wealth in the ancient world. There were just not a lot of them. All right. So any of the people, think about what's his name?
Give us a hint, we'll help you.
Samuel.
Sounds like.
Shmuel Anagi, Samuel the prince. He was a court Jew, a very significant person in the court of one of the kings of Spain. All right. Maimonides actually came from a family that had great wealth, or at one time had great wealth. So someone like that could easily have afforded a luxury like that.
So when you're the family sitting around having the Seder, you're not most are not reading out of any kind of book.
No.
They know
It-
everything.
No, they don't know everything, but usually had a person who read to others. Right? The role of the person who was leading the Seder was to facilitate the whole thing for the group. Okay.
We're leaving.
Was it
Yes, I
something
know.
I said?
Yes,
This is the Exodus.
reenactment of the Exodus.
Donate a lot of money.
Do it again.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You are welcome. Enjoy
Whatever.
whatever this is.
I think there's
food over there.
No, it's philanthropic.
Well, if there's food, we should go.
Yeah.
Well, I know it's women's philanthropy.
Were the Haggadahs done by hand?
The early ones, these are all one of a kind.
So they're all straight, but all the whole thing is printed by hand?
It's not
printed.
It's written.
I mean written by hand.
Written by hand and then illustrated. Right? Let me see.
Did you have scribes? You didn't have scribes back then, that, like you have for the Torah, like.
Yes, that was who would have written this. Look at, trying to, right? Look at the writing. Looks like Torah script.
Very much so.
Right, because it was written by the same person who would have written a Torah scroll.
Wow.
Right? This is the number of Torah scrolls necessary in that era was very low. You know, it's not like shuls proliferated the way they did at a certain point in Jewish history. And many congregations actually ended up with way more Torah scrolls than they really needed. And how many scrolls do we have in the Ark?
Nine, yeah.
I think it's 9. But let's split and go with 8, because it's compromise. All right. And I know, and one of them is a Holocaust Torah. And I think a couple of them came when the congregation from Bnei Israel became part of Rosh Hashanah, right? So most shuls in the pre-modern era would have 3. Because that's how many you need maximally in order to make things work easily, right? But you could theoretically make do with 1. It was just more of a burden on the congregation on days when, like Simchas Torah, where you read the end of Deuteronomy and the beginning of Breshit. And if you only have 1 Torah scroll, you got to roll from one end to the other. And then for the Mafkir, you got to roll back to the book of Numbers. That's time consuming, right? So if you have 1 Torah scroll, that's tough. If you have 2, all right, so you go from Deuteronomy, and then you read have another one at Genesis, and to go from the end of Deuteronomy to the end of Numbers is not that big a hassle, right? But most shuls would strive to have 3. But as you have a proliferation of synagogues, you have a proliferation of Torah schools. Right? But in the Middle Ages, most places probably may do with just 1 or 2. All right, so a scribe would have this was vacation money. Right? Scribes who were commissioned to write a Haggadah, this was not something that they could count on as revenue because it was a rarity.
How about the letters above? Next to last line. Is it?
Oh, yeah.
No,
This?
right,
Yeah.
What's that? Looks like a shin.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's he forgot a letter. Al shum shemararu hamitzrim, because the Egyptians made our lives difficult. He forgot a letter, so he put it above. Right? The only thing that's missing that we would use is a little carrot that would say insert here. All right, in the same way that this nun that's kind of floating out here is really the end of this word, and clearly he must have forgotten it and then went back. Why he didn't put it closer, I don't know, but
It also has vowels.
It does have vowels. Isn't that nice?
Yeah, it is.
Couldn't get away with that in Torah.
Nope. Right. Right. This is also one of the early illustrated Haggadot, right? And it depicts the plague of beasts. Right? People being attacked and consumed by beasts. And at the top in the Hebrew, little word in Hebrew says Arov, which is the name of the plague in Hebrew.
Right.
Okay. Okay, that was just all right. So one of the other scenes that gets depicted regularly is leaving Egypt. Right? The problem is, this looks nothing like Egypt. In fact, there's some debate as to whether this is leaving Egypt or people leaving the synagogue after a service. And maybe even, it may be that communal Pesach was not as uncommon in the past as we might think it was, wherein if you had only 1 Haggadah, and a limited number of people who knew how to read it, it's possible that you went to the synagogue and someone read the Haggadah to you, and then you went home and did the food part and the other part. Okay, as I noted, the Magid section is the story, and so we get the many children. We get the Israelites building. All right, doesn't look like Egypt, but that's okay. We'll give the guy a break. And there's Aaron in his Kohen Gadol attire, and there's Moses holding the 10 Commandments and his staff, and you get a little hint
of the horns. Okay. Leaving Egypt. Okay. And coming down from heaven, you have, I'm not sure what that, I assume it's supposed to be manna because it doesn't really look like quail, but it doesn't look like manna either.
What's that look like?
Yeah,
I don't know what it looks like, but it never in my mind's eye looked like that. You know, its description is something that falls on the ground and is sort of, like I said, just not what I imagined.
I imagine a loaf of bread.
Well, it supposedly tasted like whatever you wanted it to taste like. So, but in its depiction, it's more wafery, it's more
Whitish.
whitish and gluey. But just to show you that this motif of Israelites leaving Egypt, sometimes being pursued, sometimes not.
Can you go back to that last slide for 1 second, please?
Well, this is the same, the two pictures at the bottom, if that helps you.
Okay. Take the second painting.
This one,
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Second line. Tell me why that's all broken up like that, as opposed to the others, which are just like straight all the way across. It's just unusual that you just have these 4 little symbols there.
I see what I don't know for sure, but it says as Mitzrayim as Sesh Fatim, I will cause signs again, or I'll make signs appear against Egypt. Ani, I, Adonai. So you have 2 yuds over here. I'm not sure what this and all this is for. It looks completely superfluous.
I mean, in the Torah, when you do the Song of the Sea, you can see how it's broken up, so,
Yeah, no, that I don't think is this.
okay, thank you.
Could these be the signs?
No, because they don't really seem to look like anything. I have no idea what they're doing there. Okay, say Olamad, go and learn, right? And one of the things that we see in many of these early illustrated Haggadot is you have panels that are red and blue. And you will use gold leaf on some of the letters in the opening panel. So the word say, go, is highlighted in gold leaf, as are the 4 corners of the frame. Right?
But you also have the same spacing to the left, the bottom, to the left of side, you see the olive. They're separated from all the rest.
Yeah, these
Those three.
these I think are just meant to fill out space.
They have no
And there's
significance.
some
Well, the only thing I can think of is that it's the first letter of the next line in each case.
Uh-huh.
So Aleph, Ella, Shin, Bet, Bikesh, Shin, Shene'emar. No, he made a oops in his vowels, but okay.
Talk to them.
But I wanted to highlight this page because of its prototypical first panel, which had, like I said, the red, the blue, and the first word illustrated and then overlaid with gold leaf, with little bits of gold leaf at the corners. This is affluence. This is expensive. Right? It also highlights the appearance of what I called earlier grotesques, these combinations of human and non-human or different critters to form something. And these sort of vine-like phenomena are quite ubiquitous in medieval illustrated Haggadot. The figures at the bottom are sometimes unclear. Right? But given that the text here is talking about Laban and Jacob, this would be Jacob, this would be Laban and one of Laban's sons or soldiers. Okay. Again, we see the illustrated first panel with the red and the blue, and the first word, Vayikach, is in gold leaf. Right? Here, the frame is a little more elaborately decorated, but we have more of the grotesques all around and various critters. Okay. And give you a close up of this? No. Okay. Just take note of the bottom over here for a second, right? You got a huntsman, you've got a couple of dogs, and you got a rabbit. Okay, just park that in memory. Okay. Again, the motif of first words in a passage. Here you've got 4 on a page being highlighted, but you've got the alternating blue and red and the gold leaf. And this is the wise and the wicked son. Right? Well, actually, the wise, and that's Rabbi Eliezer. The wicked one is not here. Oh, we saw that already. We saw that already. Okay. One other motif that becomes very popular for illustrative purposes is the passage, Shvoch chamatcha ala goyim, pour out your wrath upon the nations who behave like not so nicely. Okay? The surrounding panel is not an illustration of the paragraph. The illustration is the insert over here, right? Where you see a person riding on a small, it looks a little too horsey, but it's supposed to be a goat. Because Elijah, who will announce the arrival of the Messiah, will come riding through the gates of Jerusalem on a goat or a little horse. Right? But the surrounding one really, really reflects a page that would have been done by a Christian artist. It was common for the shield or the crest to be held by what looked like hairy human beings. They were meant to be burly and ominous. Okay. Shafach hamatcha again, all right? So here you have the Messiah on his donkey. Did I say goat before?
Yeah.
I meant donkey, sorry. Elijah is following him with the shofar to announce his arrival. And as the Midrash, as the Torah, as the Bible describes, the gates of the city are sealed, only to be opened when he arrives.
Is that near the end of the Haggadah?
That is near the end. It's in the second half, near the end of the Haggadah.
This is the couple of Elijah, that section?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Right. And again, you see just random motifs that were common in medieval illustration. Okay. A familiar prayer, Dayenu. Right? But when we have Elu, the word Elu Hotziyanu, Elu Asava Hemshvati. Okay, so the Elu is highlighted. You got the blue and red motif, but the word Elu and the word Dayenu is done in gold leaf.
Inside the first star in the middle of that, is that common or uncommon? I don't remember seeing something in the middle of a star.
I mean, you get it again over here.
Say is that
But that one's kind of on its side. I think what you're getting, it's also not entirely clear exactly at what point this became normatively Jewish.
Had we seen stars previous to this?
Not that I recall. Not that I recall, but I remind you that the Magen David is made up of two triangles. One pointed upward and one pointed downward. Okay? Those were originally symbols of male and female. Okay? We don't think about this very much, but we're in a military corner of the country. How do you denote rank? You have more of those pointy things on your sleeve and you rank higher. At a certain point, you switch them for something else, but those were measures of rank. And those were expressions of maleness and manhood and a hierarchy of manhood.
was that past the age of 13?
Hmm?
Was that at 13 years of age? Was that a sort of like a rite of passage?
No. I'm just talking about it in terms of military stuff.
Oh, okay, all right, got you. Okay, thank you.
I mean, how do you can tell a corporal from a sergeant easily just by looking, privates only got one. So it's at this what we call a Magen David, a Star of David, was probably something that was quite ubiquitous before it became sort of almost exclusively Jewish. Because you see examples of it in Christian art and architecture. You see, there's some churches which have them. And were they known to have been Stars of David, it is unlikely that the church would have used them in their art or architecture. Actually, and just one other note, right? The Jewish scribe would always be the one who wrote the text. The illustrator who came along afterwards could very well have been from a Christian artist guild who normally did work for the church or for rich, affluent members of the society.
Would the illustrator frequently have the translation?
No, not necessarily.
So he wouldn't know
My
what
guess,
to-
my guess is that
necessarily what to
he would
draw.
not necessarily know what to draw, and we're going to see one example of how he had no idea what to draw and what it translated into. All right, and sometimes he would just use these grotesques that were common to the frontispiece and other pages in sacred texts that he was doing for the church, and just stuck them in here. Because none of this illustration has anything to do with that. Okay. One of the other phenomena we see at a little bit in the Middle Ages is that a machzor would almost be an all-inclusive volume. So that any prayer, any ritual, anything was in this one volume. Okay? So this is from the Rothschild Machzor, but it's Halach Ma'anya, and then here's Manishtana. This is your Haggadah in your very, very large prayer book. But here too, the illustrations, well, very typical of this era and this geography have absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with what's going on here. Okay. This is from the Rylands Haggadah. Again, we see the red, blue, and the gold phenomena. And here is the plague of boils and the plague of hail.
So in that case, the illustrator would know.
Yes. And there were Jewish artists who did some of these, but not always. On the flip side, because this is from biblical text, it's not hard to say to the artist, okay, this is this plague of this is the plague of that, and if you have questions, go look in your Bible. Okay, we got the wise son and the wicked son, but again, we see the red, the blue, and the gold leaf. Right? Look at the depiction of the wicked son. What does he look like?
A warrior.
A warrior, a soldier. Okay. Next year, when we do a thing about the four sons, we'll see why.
Next year.
Next year. I'm planning ahead.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. This is a depiction of the rebuilt temple in Jerusalem. Okay? This is, and a hope for the future. And what do the doors of the temple of the future have on them? The Ten Commandments. All right. The old temple in Jerusalem, neither the first or the second, would have had anything like that. And my guess is that plans for the third one would probably not include them. Early Sarajevo Haggadah, you've again the red, the blue, the same motifs, and this is Moses teaching or speaking to the people, and this is Moses coming down at the end of his life, blessing the people. Right? Except here he's literally laying his hands on them to bless them, and it's not clear that that's the artist's rendition of Moses laying his hands on Joshua as his successor. Sort of this transference of authority.
No horns.
No horns. The horns actually seem to enter the artistic realm a little later than the 14th century. Okay. All right, there's a close-up of that one. And what do we have? We've got a guy with his dogs, and we got rabbits.
And a shofar.
Well, a horn.
Okay.
Dafka, not a shofar in this case. It would have been a hunter's horn. Okay, so if I were to ask you, why for is this in the Haggadah? You would say to me, because somebody did that. You can come up with any theory you want. But I'm going to bet that you're not going to come up with the right one.
Do you know the right one?
I do. I'm going to come back. I got to skip over these. Why did I really made a mess of this. I was playing with it last night and I changed the order, and I should not have done so because I have made a mess. Yeah, I'm going to come back to some of those, I promise. If not, okay. But I had to get to this one. All right. If you look over here, the illustrated gold leaf thing says Yud, Kuf, Nun, He, Zayin. All right, which is an acronym for Yain, Kiddush, Ner, Havdalah, Zman. Right? It's instructions for the order in which you are supposed to do things on a Saturday night. Chal liyot b'motzei Shabbat omer. If Pesach starts on a Saturday night, this is the order in which you say the various prayers and blessings. First, the one over the wine, then you say Kiddush, then you say the blessing over the candle, then you say Havdalah, and then you say Shehechianu. Okay? Well, people will often create an acronym of something as a way of trying to remember, right? Some acronyms work better, some acronyms not so much, all right? So the acronym of Yain Kiddush Ner Havdalah Zman is Yud Kuf Nun He Zayin, okay? Which is not really a word, doesn't, but if you do try to vocalize it, it becomes Yaknahaz. Yaknahaz, which sounds a whole lot like Yagenhaz. Yagenhaz was the German for chase the rabbit. All right. And so on the page where you have Kiddush, over and over again, you've got the huntsman and the dog and the rabbit. All right. And here you have it again. The first Cincinnati Haggadah, much later, maintains the motif. All right. You've got the huntsman, the dogs, and the rabbit. And a few more down here just for good measure. And all right, Yain Kiddush Ner Havdalah Zman. All right, the same formula, the same order structure is there, but this is the illustration of it. Right? The Augsburg Haggadah, 1534, huntsman, dogs, and the rabbits, and there's a net just to make things more complicated. All right. And in this one, the huntsman and the dogs are on one side of the fence, and the rabbits are sort of seeming to escape onto the other side. And there's a huntsman carrying one of his prey. Okay, so non-Jewish illustrators are given this Yaknahaz, which sounds to them like Yagenhaz, chase the rabbit, and you get these hunt scenes. Okay? Once these scenes appear in Haggadah after Haggadah, someone comes along and says, oh, I got to explain this because it makes no sense. So it becomes the story of the Jewish people who are pursued and chased and persecuted only to escape with God's help to be able to run away and flourish.
It's the Exodus.
This is the current and future redemption of the Jewish people by God from the ongoing persecution and pursuit of our enemies. Right? It's not what was there. It's how do I explain this thing that's at the bottom of the Haggadah page that makes no sense? And when things make no sense, I do what we've always done, which is I create a Midrash to explain what the heck is going on. It's absolutely fascinating to me how this works. Okay. Okay. We saw Dayenu before with the gold leaf on the Ilu. Here, instead of doing Dayenu, it's Velo. Ilu X, Velo Y, Dayenu. That's the formula. But they illustrated Velo instead of Dayenu because it's shorter. You don't have to have as fat a column. You don't, right? And you have our friends, the grotesques, appearing on the page. And there's a close-up of one of the grotesques from the page. It's a sort of a stylized rabbit. All right. We have time, I think, for one more. Okay, so let me go back. Right. Bird's Head Haggadah, very early. So,
Like playing marbles.
right, you've got the hands of God dropping the manna.
Those don't look
Like birds' heads. No. So there's a suggestion that this may have been added into that Haggadah because the hats are wrong, the faces are wrong. And for a Haggadah that was so careful not to depict human beings, that it would so cavalierly depict hands of God makes no sense. Skip to Oh, let's do this last one. Okay, so as part of the second half of the Seder after the meal, we do Hallel and we sing, B'tzei Yisrael, Mi Mitzrayim, Beit Yaakov, etc., etc., etc. Here's the text, and we have an illustration, and we have B'tzeit on a blue background in gold leaf, and here are people leaving Egypt, and they're knocking on the doors to get people to join them. And over here we have this. Okay, here's a bigger version of it.
At least one too.
He's got it's a dog with a collar. Okay. But I apologize. I tried to find a way to make this less fuzzy, but to the best of your ability, look closely at the dog's head and mouth. And what do you not see?
Teeth.
No teeth and no tongue. Right? Now, why does this matter? It matters because there's this line in the book of Exodus that when the Israelites left, not a tongue, not a dog barked.
Right.
All right. Well, how do I depict a dog not barking? I depict the dog not barking by showing you his mouth open without a tongue, because without the tongue, the dog can't really, like we can't really speak. Therefore, the dog is muted in fulfillment of the biblical verse. So when the Israelites left Egypt, not a dog barked. Okay. So part of what we see in the Haggadah is, in fact, examples of illustrators who sometimes were very, very sensitive to the texts that they were rendering artistically, and sometimes they were without a clue as to what they were rendering artistically.
Just scroll through the pictures.
Or use the motifs that I use for everything. You know, which is not an uncommon phenomenon in art and architecture. You know, synagogues have for centuries looked a great deal like
Synagogues.
well, but they look like religious or public buildings in the places from which they hail, which can be we can do a whole thing on synagogue art and architecture at a different time.
I wasn't able to be here last week. You keep talking about the red, the blue, and the gold. What was the significance of that?
We didn't talk about that last week either. But red and blue were the most popular of pigments, and gold was the gold leaf, so that was real affluence. And it's why most of these were one-of-a-kind creations or of a limited edition, because they were written by hand. usually on vellum, and then illustrated by someone after the text was written, and then used at the Seder.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks, it's just gorgeous. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yes,
There's
yeah,
always-
Gorgeous picture.
yeah, no,
And that they preserved all these years, some of them.
yes, yes, that, they're not, though there's some where you see where the pages have wine spills on them, and all the things you would expect from a Haggadah, especially an older one.
Have you ever seen the Haggadah? There was one.
Yes.
For Reagan, I was always wondering, why of all things get to Reagan's the, Haggadah? Do you have pictures of it? That matches maybe
Yeah, do I have pictures of it?
for next year?
For next year, I can have some pictures of it. I don't have some in this
That's okay.
collection.
Sorry.
I mean, I mean, this is just a fraction of the images I have of illustrated Haggadot. And most of what we did, except for that, one Paris one, because for me, like I said, to my mind's eye, it's that Midrash about Pharaoh's daughter's arms growing miraculously long. Other than that, I kind of stayed in the early era of Haggadah illustration.
Have you actually seen all of these and photographed them yourself?
I wish. I have reproductions of many of them. I have volumes that contain reproductions of some of them. I've seen a few of them from the library at JTS. But no, and I worked in the rare book room for a while. But at the time that I was working in the rare book room, my task was based more on early and first edition folios of the Talmud.
Rob, I was sharing with you something I don't share to others. It's like